The Carolina Panthers traded up to get the number one overall pick a couple of days ago now, and they gave up a haul. We all knew it was going to take quite a bit to move up from pick 9 to pick 1, and to ultimately have the luxury of choosing their quarterback of the future, but at what cost? And that cost turned out to be 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and receiver DJ Moore. And by doing this, the Carolina Panthers have made a huge mistake. There is a lot to this and a lot to break down, and it's not as simple as good haul for Chicago, bad trade for Carolina, and in today's video, we are going to break it down from every angle. What it means for Carolina's future, what it means for Chicago's future, and more. And there is a lot to dive into with this trade and ultimately the Panthers' future, and without further ado, let's begin. And when looking at this trade, the thing that jumped out to me most within this trade was including receiver DJ Moore. Carolina wanted to give up their 2025 first instead of DJ Moore, but Bears general manager Ryan Poles was not willing to budge. And by including DJ Moore, well, simply put, this scares the shit out of me for the Panthers' future. Obviously, they will have free agency, and they still have their second-round pick at number 39 overall to address the receiver position, but you are now trying to replace what you just had in DJ Moore. I understand Ryan Poles needed to have DJ Moore included in this, but I truly thought Carolina should have backed out and said something along the lines of, "We will call you back," and proceed to call Arizona at number 3 and ask what it would take to get the 3rd overall pick. Because Carolina's receiving core right now is awful, and the free agent class at the receiver position is not good, and this draft class isn't the best at the receiver position either. I truly do respect going up and getting who you believe your franchise quarterback will be for the next hopefully 10 years, if not longer, but giving them next to no help is certainly a strategy, and not a good one. Over the weekend, the odds changed drastically for the number 1 overall pick, and Ohio State's CJ Stroud is currently the betting favorite to be the number 1 overall pick. And if CJ is the number 1 overall pick, this is going to be a hell of a transition for him, and I don't think it's going to be a smooth transition to the NFL either. I like CJ as a prospect, and I think he brings a lot to the table, but going from a supporting cast that NFL quarterbacks wish they had for the entirety of his collegiate career to whoever the Panthers have in 2023, and at the moment that's Terrace Marshall, Shi Smith, and Laviska Shenault, is going to be a very, very difficult transition for Stroud. Over the past 2 years, CJ has thrown to Garrett Wilson, who went on to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year, Chris Olave, who had over 1,000 yards with a 34-year-old Andy Dalton throwing him passes for most of the 2022 season, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had over 1,600 yards in 2021, and Marvin Harrison Jr., who will be a top 10 pick at minimum in 2024. NFL quarterbacks would kill to have that receiving core, and to not only have that receiving core, but to have a first-round pick at left tackle in Paris Johnson Jr., and whoever goes to Carolina will have a good left tackle for quite some time in Ikem Ekwonu. Ikem really improved down the stretch of his rookie season and should be there for quite a while. And for as good of a receiving core as CJ had during his time at Ohio State, there's one huge underlying factor that worries the shit out of me with CJ, and especially if he goes to Carolina without DJ Moore. Under pressure during the 2022 regular season, CJ was not good. He was just 26 of 64 and completed passes at a rate of 40.6%, and granted he did have 5 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Per PFF, he had 3 big-time throws to 7 turnover-worthy plays. And at the NFL level, a lot of the time, those turnover-worthy plays do in fact become turnovers. And what particularly concerns me is over the past few years, CJ could turn to any of the receivers he had and pretty much say, go make a play, because they were all that good. Not just one of the receivers he was throwing to, but all 4. And at the moment, it's not an exaggeration to say all 4 of the receivers he was throwing to in college are all better than what the Panthers currently have. And to give you an idea of the receivers in free agency, We're talking about guys like Adam Thielen, who will be 33 at the start of the season, Juju Smith-Schuster, DJ Chark, and Jacoby Myers. I do want to say there is a chance one or multiple of these guys are signed by the time this video is released, but you get the point. As for CJ Stroud himself, I know there will be a crowd that brings up the Georgia game, and rightfully so by the way, as CJ put on a show. Within the Georgia game, CJ was 23 of 34 for 348 yards and 4 touchdowns, and he showed what he could do in the biggest game of his life. But the question that I continue to ask when discussing CJ and when evaluating him as a prospect is, how much stock do you put in one game? Yes, CJ played the game of his life, and all the credit goes to him, but you can't expect that type of game from him every single Sunday, and especially with the Panthers' lack of weapons. I also think there's a little too much dependence being put on Frank Reich at the moment too. I like Reich as a coach and think he can lead the Panthers to success, but I also think there's a crowd that legitimately thinks he will turn CJ Stroud into an All-Pro just because he's Frank Reich. Carolina also needs help at the running back position, and the good news for them is this is a loaded running back class, so I don't worry about that, but with presumably Stroud entering this situation, I have my concerns. The reason I brought up CJ Stroud's under pressure numbers and placed such a high emphasis on them is because of how concerning they are. There's a lot of discussion around Will Levis, the quarterback from Kentucky, as a prospect, and how he had no help during his final year there, but under pressure, Levis was 43 of 82, which translates to him completing 52.4% of his passes, which is nearly 12% more than CJ under pressure. And to toss Stroud into this situation with a bottom 5 receiving core scares me for not only his future, but for the Panthers too. Because if Stroud does not produce right away and the Panthers win 4 or 5 games next year, then the GM who made this trade in Scott Fitterer will more than likely be gone, and the next GM will have to attempt to clean up this mess. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the situation the Bears put Justin Fields in just 2 years ago. Ironically, both went to Ohio State, but both would enter the league with their GM making a last-gasp trade to try and save their job, along with no weapons to help their young quarterback. And 2 years into Justin Fields' career, we still don't know whether or not he is the franchise quarterback. Which segues us into discussing Chicago's side of the trade and to ultimately discuss their future. Until this trade happened, I thought there was a legitimate possibility they do a Madden-style trade, where they would trade back with Houston at number 2, and then again with Indy at number 4. Houston would trade up to secure their franchise quarterback, and to secure they don't have to play him twice a year for the next 10 years, instead of Indy trading up from 4 to 1. Because up until this trade, Chicago that is, controlled the draft. This opens up so many possibilities with what Chicago can do now to build their team for the next few years. Justin Fields now has a legit weapon in DJ Moore, and Darnell Mooney will be a good second receiver. Remember, Mooney went for over 1,000 yards back in 2021, and with Chicago picking at 9, there is a very good chance they can still take the number 1 offensive tackle in the class at 9, obviously while still positioning themselves for future success. And what I particularly love about what General Manager Ryan Poles can do now is trade draft capital for players that may not be re-signed. He did that last year with Chase Claypool, and to be clear, the re-signed part is by the original team that drafted them, and while the Bears did give up a lot for Claypool, we've seen teams give up second-round picks to non-contending teams, and it's worked in other situations. TJ Hawkinson was sent to Minnesota, and the Bears' own Roquan Smith went to Baltimore. And for clarity on the non-contending team's part, Hawkinson was traded between weeks 8 and 9 when the Lions fell to 1 and 6. They obviously finished the year on a high note, but there was fear for a good portion of the year they were in fact the same old Lions. All of this to say, players from the 2020 draft class next year that may be looking for contract extensions that may not get them, well, Chicago now has enough ammo to make moves, and big moves at that. Finishing with the worst record in the NFL in 2022 was the best thing that could have happened to Chicago because of what the future represents for them. There's a good chance next year Carolina doesn't go to the playoffs, as that would require good play from a rookie quarterback with not great offensive weapons, and very quickly we could see Chicago have a quarterback of the future in Justin Fields, a receiver they can feed time and time again in DJ Moore, and draft a running back to help out Justin Fields too. DJ Moore has seemingly been in the NFL for a while, but he will only be 26 years old at the start of the 2023 season. With not great quarterback play, Moore has racked up 3 1,000-yard seasons, and with Justin Fields entering a pivotal year in his career, and ultimately his development as a quarterback, he will be leaning on DJ Moore a lot. As in, there's a good chance DJ Moore puts up career highs for Chicago this year. At some point, Chicago will have to build a front seven on their defense, but this goes back to them having trade ammo. Sure, they're going to miss on Will Anderson now, and I don't intend to say that lightly, but when you acquire another first-round pick, along with 2 second-round picks and DJ Moore, for a franchise that needed to help their young quarterback out in the worst way, well, that's a pretty damn good trade-off for the Bears. And we all know 3-14 and finishing with the number 1 overall pick is obviously a bad season, but there were so many close losses last year that if a play here or a play there goes Chicago's way, they weren't far off from being a 7-10 team. They were 1-7 in one-score games in 2022, with their only win coming over the Houston Texans, who finished with the second worst record in the NFL. Do I think Chicago is going from 3-14 to 11-6 in 1 year? I personally do not, but an 8-9 or 9-8 year and on the brink of a playoff spot would be an insanely successful season. They are still weak up front, especially on the defensive side of the football, but to acquire this much for trading back 8 spots was a huge win for them, no matter how you slice it. I also think Detroit will win the NFC North in 2023, but I don't think it's unreasonable for Chicago to finish second in the North. Will they, of course, is something else entirely, but without Aaron Rodgers and with the Vikings going through a transition phase, and a team Chicago nearly beat when Justin Fields was the starting quarterback for them in Week 5, well, I wouldn't put anything past a vastly improved Bears team. Because not only will the Bears team be vastly improved, they will start to believe. And that's something that hasn't been around the Bears locker room, or at least not a lot of it over the past few years, as Chicago has compiled just 17 wins over the past 3 years, and have finished last in the division 5 times in the past 9 years. But this is a franchise-altering trade, and that also applies to the Panthers within this. Because if they nail this trade and acquire a lot of talent to place around CJ Stroud, or whoever they draft, the concerns for the quarterback and them not having weapons still applies, whether it's Stroud or anyone else. Nobody is going to care what they gave up for the number 1 overall pick. Granted, this is an extreme exaggeration, but nobody cares the Chiefs gave up 2 first-round picks to move up and get Patrick Mahomes. And obviously the Panthers gave up a lot more to go from 9-1 than the Chiefs did to go from 27-10, but the point stands. And for Chicago, for a team and franchise where there was a ton of speculation of what they would do and how could they acquire another second-round pick to make up for the Chase Claypool trade, they more than answered the questions. Also, Chicago had a second-round pick before the trade, as it was from the Roquan Smith trade. But the future is right in front of them, and it's insanely bright. And how will Ryan Poles shape the future of the Chicago Bears? I can't wait to find out. And that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world and help the growth of the channel a ton. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.